We are now live.
Okay, I want to call this meeting of the IGR committee to order. Item number 2 on our agenda is agenda review and minutes review. Do we have any additions to the agenda or any corrections to make to the minutes from the last meeting in October? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Evans. What I would like to do and propose is that for item number 3, discussion on IGR 2025 priorities, I'd like to move the last item in the on our draft priorities list up to the beginning, which is the rental housing application screening fee. We have staff with us that can speak to that item. And so if we can do that, that would be.
There are no objections. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead.
Chair, if we could also add a short item on annexation to our agenda. I know we have staff here that's prepared to speak to that.
All right. Session. And we'll do that after our discussion on the federal earmarks, the earmark process.
We can add it if
we want to move this up.
We'll do, if we can just do it right after the rental housing.
Let's do it right after rental housing.
The staff is able to then
go and do other things. Yes, I got you. All right. Is that everything so far for item number 2 on the agenda? Nothing else that we need to adjust? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. None opposed, so it's 2-0. So we're good to go. Let's see, what do we say? Item number 3.
Great.
Go for it.
And I thank you, Chair. And I just got a text from Councilor Ye. She's unable to attend today. So
okay.
Thank you. So just for the record, Ethan Nelson, I'm the Intergovernmental Relations Manager. And today on the attached memo from November, that is dated November 6th, the draft 2025 Eugene State Legislative Priorities with the November 6th updates. On page 3 at the end of at the bottom of the page, there's an update related to the rental housing application screening fee prohibition. And so I want to just really quickly introduce that item and then ask our guests to come and join and introduce themselves. And so the Representative Gamba, who ostensibly will be the House Housing co-chair for the House Housing Committee, intends to propose legislation that would prohibit the charging of rental application screening fees statewide. And more than likely, this would preempt local governments from setting their own policies, and Eugene has adopted a policy related to this. And so we wanted to have a conversation here to explain some of the ins and outs of history, and then also seek some guidance related to what IGR's position potentially would be on that. And so,
okay,
Lauren and Genevieve and Will, if you can come and join, and sit either on either side, just so that you're can be caught on video. No, on the sides. Yeah. Okay. And then introduce yourselves for the record. Go from there. That's great. You're caught on video. One of the inputs that we've had from previous meetings is to ensure that if anybody's watching the video or the recording of it, that everybody can be seen.
Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Summers, and I'm an assistant city attorney for the city of Eugene.
Hi, I'm Genevieve Middleton. I am the Affordable Housing Policy and Planning Manager.
And I'm Will Dowdy. I'm the Community Development Division Manager.
All right.
Great. So the issue that is before us is that, as I kind of gave a quick summary, is that we don't necessarily have a position related to this bill that would come before the House. And we would like to be able to get clarity based upon what Eugene's city council's policy is, existing policy is, and how that may need further clarification and clarity for our advocacy work in city. And one of the reasons why we're bringing this forward is that Representative Gamba has been very supportive of specifically Eugene's needs in the housing and unhoused shelter worlds in the past, and then also has been an outspoken advocate for cities. And so he has requested that if Eugene is able to support, that we are able to. So that's why we're bringing this today. Can you give a little bit of insight as to what our kind of the legal perspective, and then we can also ask for what the historical perspective has been?
Sure. So as I'm sure you recall, the council adopted a set of other protections that include a cap on the amount of an applicant screening charge, which is the fee that a rental housing applicant pays for things like background checks and other things. And so the current council direction, which has been codified, is that in Eugene, landlords may not charge an applicant screening charge that exceeds $10 or the actual cost of doing the screening, whichever is less. So by default, typically a $10 cap. That provision was challenged. It was overturned by the circuit court, the trial court, and then appealed. The city appealed that decision to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals agreed that the city had the authority to set that $10 cap. And we're still in today's the very last day of the period for the landlords to appeal the Court of Appeals decision to the Supreme Court. At this point, we haven't seen that they've done that, but they have until the end of the day today. So if it's not appealed to the Supreme Court, then the Court of Appeals decision will stand. Court of Appeals said the city has the authority to set the applicant screening cap at $10. What Representative Gamba is proposing is a $0 applicant screening charge, which is different than the latest policy direction that staff received from council, which would allow an applicant screening charge, albeit a very small one. And so the question for IGR and potentially the full council is a no dollar applicant screening charge consistent with Eugene City Council policy direction or not, to give Ethan an understanding of whether the city supports the bill or would like to see something different, et cetera. So hopefully that clarified a little bit.
Yep, and if you can give kind of some of the history on, just as a refresher.
Yeah, so in the time leading up to staff bringing the renter protections roadmap to council, the Housing Policy Board provided a recommendation to actually ban the application and screening fees, which would in practice make screening fees a cost of doing business by the landlords. That renter protections process began in 2018 and then culminated as coming to council first in 2021, then in 2022. So that is a bit of the history. We know a little bit more contextual information about screening fees. We conducted the rental housing experience survey in fall of 2023, and then conducted a second, that was phase 1, and then phase 2 of the survey was a landlord's rental housing experience survey, and that was conducted in spring of 2024. And we are currently compiling the results of those 2 surveys into a report for council. And we're working to get that to you very soon. But we do have some preliminary results regarding applications. So people with housing vouchers, such as Section 8 housing choice vouchers, and people with conviction histories responded to the survey that they are 5 times more likely than other renters to have submitted more than 10 applications before finding a place to live. We also learned from part 2 of the survey that professional property managers receive significantly more applications per unit than property owners who manage their own rentals, with most units receiving 5 or more applications. 55% of property owners versus 10% of property managers say they don't charge application screening fees. And 7% of property owners versus 48% of property managers reported they charge $50 or more per application and screening fees. And then we've also heard that some property managers require an application fee upfront in order to view the unit. Likewise, we've heard that property managers and owners have shared that the screening costs will be offset by raising rents or other fees. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. There's going to be more context and more qualitative background for the survey and when you get your report.
So our $10 cap, I'm sorry, I'm just jumping in. Our $10 cap has not been enforced because it's of the legal situation.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Do we have an idea of what the average cost is for a landlord to do the screening?
Today, I don't have that information. When we were having these discussions in the Housing Policy Board, we heard anecdotal information that the cost of the application screening fees was between $20 and $35. And that had to do with the screening services that were being used, which there are different screening services and different levels of screening that can occur. Those costs might have changed in the last couple of years.
The parties to the litigation, I believe, said it was in the neighborhood of $50 to $60. That was two distinct parties. So when you say average cost of screening, we don't have that information.
The reason I was asking is when we were going through all this, I inquired to a bunch of property, not a bunch, but a number of property managers. And whoever I talked to, every time I talked to somebody, I would get a slightly different figure. And so trying to figure out, well, is that reasonable to have the applicant pay a portion of that, and $10 is just a portion of that cost, or not?
Let me ask you this. Is there a standard criteria across the board of what is included, what the fee should be covering, like credit report, those kinds of things, verification of income or employment? So there's different levels. I'm just trying to gauge, what are the basics that, landlords need in order to process an application? Or does it just vary by landlord?
Unless you have something from the legal situation. I mean, I think what we have seen is that it's a variety of, what we have been told is a variety of things. And so it can, everything from just application, just an application fee in order for me to look through this. This is kind of the administrative time to all of the different kinds of checks and systems and services that you can buy to do that. And so there's a variety of things, and what the action that council took said all of that bundled up, anything that could fall into that, anything that does fall into that for a landlord is capped at $10. And then it's up to the landlord to decide based on a limitation of how much they can charge if they want to modify or not the services that they get. And that's most of the way, or that's headed in the direction of that comment that Genevieve made earlier from Housing Policy Board, which is to view these costs as a cost of doing business. Now, that was put forward as an argument for a complete ban on fees, but I think that that is partially included in the idea of a cap that's not intended to necessarily capture the actual cost. So does that make sense?
And just to give some additional context of the statewide conversation, so, and I'm forgetful of the bill number, but from the 2023 session, Representative Nathanson put forth a bill that would allow cities to set caps. And so it was, yeah, we advocated for that bill because at that point it was in alignment with council adopted policy. And the bill did not move in the building. And it was, but a compromise was crafted to say during the interim, there would be a work group, legislative work group to address, to talk about this and come up with a resolution and bring that back in a package. It did not happen in the interim. There was some meetings, and then we had the short session. And then, and one of the people who had been assigned to that had been Representative Helfrich, who at the time moved on the Republican side in the House, moved into leadership. And so he was he was working on a much different portfolio of efforts. And so it kind of stalled. We had the short session. And then after the short session, that work group came back together. Representative Helfrich and Representative Gamba had been leading it. And it brought together stakeholders from rental housing and the landlord associations. And our rental housing navigator attended those meetings, as did I. And what came out of those was that there was no negotiation going to happen. Like, parties were giving information. A lot of those questions were asked. There was a lot of presentation on the costs of these things, what's included. And so when there was no resolution and no opportunity to find common ground, Representative Gamba said, well, I'm just going to move forward with, this is the direction that we had previously. And so we're going to do that. So my sense is that there will, if this bill will get traction, and there will be legislative hearings, and a lot of those questions will come on up in committee, and there will be engagement reports. More than likely, because Eugene has adopted this, we will be asked to weigh in and engage in a manner. And so having clarity from IGR and also from council is really going to be helpful for us to navigate because it is a politically sensitive issue. I just want to acknowledge that. So I think the question that, and why we brought this to today, is really this aspect of, does IGR want to take a position on this concept? And we don't have bill language. I've asked for it. They received a legislative concept, bill draft. Representative Gamba's staff did. They reviewed it, edited, sent it back to legislative council, and they still have not gotten it back. So that's, we wanted to have that prior to coming, but we don't have it. We know that the tenet is to prohibit fees statewide. So the question that we're really trying to get at is, does IGR want to take a position on this? And if so, it can be, and a recommendation, it can be incorporated into what we generally bring to council to say, here's the adopted priorities and positions. Or it could be added to, we have a work session in late January on another item that could be added in. So it's a more robust policy discussion on a couple different topics with council related to what the position on some of these things are. Or it could then also be scheduled for a later date that could also be incorporated into, if you're bringing back and it's a kind of content area, and you can add on a discussion about what policy might be. So that's really what we're seeking today is, and also if you don't feel prepared to give that guidance, we have time. We can come back and have this conversation in December as well, the December meeting, and actually in January, because we've got 2 meetings in addition to this one before the council will have the work session on adopting, reviewing, and ideally adopting IGR priorities.
Mayor?
Well, I'm grappling with this. I mean, on the one hand, we just went through this. We're still going through this whole process to get our $10 cap. I just it's sort of frustrating to just do all that and then have a statewide bill kind of undo it. I'm wondering if Gamba has any interest in just using ours as the model, since it will have gone through the court system. Sort of validated instead of saying a statewide elimination limit, everybody's got a $10 cap. And I don't know if he's open to that or whether,
And I think, thank you, Mayor, for that. And I think that this is kind of the core question that we've brought on up that we noodle on is council adopted and took a local action in this area that then is being legally challenged and worked through the courts. The proposal we put forward would basically preempt
right,
local governments from taking the action that
Right.
council did.
One more time.
So but it is also in alignment
right,
with what had been reported to council and then council's deliberation, and it's a little bit different, but it's in policy alignment. So that's where we are.
it's a problem, right?
And generally, when something comes forward from the state to kind of set state policy, there's an interest to have consistency across the state rather than to say, well, this community can do this, unless it's been granted. It's been pre-existing. So
So I'm not entirely comfortable with it, I guess is my answer. I'm not, I'm not entirely, except that Rep Gamba is such an important ally. In so many ways. The other thing is, Genevieve, you had a data point about the number of private landlords and commercial landlords or professional, whatever, property management companies and their fees. And it was something like 50% don't you collect an application fee at all of private landlords?
55% of property owner survey respondents versus the 10% of property managers don't charge application screening fees.
But they may incorporate those costs in other ways.
Or not at all. They don't do as thorough a property. They don't do a big background check, so they're not paying all those extra fees for.
Well, I mean, if you're renting to your son or daughter and you're charging them, whatever, you may not charge them a fee to, do credit report and all the rest of that kind of thing. So it can, it can vary very widely.
Yeah, I mean, a lot
Swing
of people
is-
just call the employer and say, are they gainfully employed? Do they show up for work? Do you expect them to have an income? I mean, it's just stop there. Can they pay the rent, right? Call the previous landlord. Call it good.
Well, and my problem with this is that, similar to the mayor's, it is another, what I would call, I won't say it's an attack on the home, but it does, curb our ability to, govern ourselves in a way that we see fit at the local level versus having the state tell us what to do. If we're going to do that, we might as well just fold up the tent and just let the state run everything, right? Basically. Why are we, it's a rhetorical question. I mean, why would we even be sitting here talking about, intergovernmental relations and all the rest of that if every time something comes up, we're going to end up going, at loggerheads with, the state legislature over control and, regulation.
Is the city of Eugene, we did this work, or did Portland or have other cities followed our lead at all in terms of these rental cap application fees?
As far as applicant screening fees go, I'm not aware of any other jurisdictions that have. At the time that council adopted the renter protections, including the applications cap on the application screening charge, I don't believe Portland had one. And because the litigation was, happened so quickly after the adoption, I'm guessing that if other jurisdictions are thinking about it, they're waiting. Right. So.
I think this is one of the reasons why when this bill comes forward, will not only be asked to share a position, give a position, but we'll also be asked to engage in what our learning has been. And so I think that that's just part of us, our leadership in the state and being engaged and having presence in Salem, which is not always an easy path.
But it hasn't really been implemented at the local level, so we won't actually have a lot of data by February or March, whenever this comes up.
We will know by the next IGR meeting whether or not the Court of Appeals decision has been appealed.
Right.
We may or may not know whether the Supreme Court has accepted review, because they don't have to take every case that comes to them, and they have a lot of flexibility in the timing that they get to take to decide whether or not to take a piece of litigation. So, but we will at least have an idea about whether the Court of Appeals decision is final by the time the next IGR meeting rolls around. If that's helpful.
Yeah, that's helpful.
So I think the question here is, should we make a recommendation back to council on Representative Gamba's proposal, or should we just take this to council and say, okay, we've been through this for the last 3 or 4 years. You know, what do the rest of you think? Go ahead, Randy.
The second is what I favor.
Yeah, I think attaching it to the work session that's already scheduled. I could guess that council is gonna say this is a home rule question and that they're not gonna want to give that up, but I want them to be able to say that. Or surprise me and say something else, or surprise Karen, and say something else.
Wouldn't surprise you too.
Surprise me too. I can always watch.
So if I'm hearing that, and you don't need to take a vote or anything, but what I'm hearing is that ideally we can add this to our late January work session where we're gonna be talking about 3115. Add that and have a more robust policy discussion.
I think that is the consensus that I'm hearing around the table.
Okay. Thank you. And then, Lauren, can you stick around just for the?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So at the work session, and I apologize for the date, but it was recently, there was a discussion about annexation and what to incentivize annexation. And the IGR, just as a reminder, in the policy document as a statement, and I think it's Councilor Grove's initiative years back to say, like, just add the city of Eugene supports incentives for annexation, for voluntary annexation. So that's an existing statement that we have and policy that we operate on. In addition to that, we wanted to, Lauren brought in the, I apologize, what's the amendment called?
Okay.
The Getty Amendment. And we chatted a little bit about what that really is and the legislative history on it. And we wanted to share that because if the IGR does want to add that, or council does want to add that as a position for this next coming session and wants to do something different than what is already on the policies, which is we support incentives, broad and, gives us latitude, flexibility. But we wanted to, I think it would be important for you to hear just what specifically was the Getty Amendment, and then moving forward, what potentially council might want to do there.
Yeah, so if I just could add a little bit, I think in that voluntary annexation work session, Councilor Clark in particular, and I believe also Councilor Groves were interested in something, had recalled what had happened with the Getty property, were interested in exploring potentially something as soon as this upcoming legislative session that would be similar. And the suggestion was made in the work session that because of the timing, it would make sense to start with IGR committee, and then if IGR is interested, kind of move it forward that way rather than having council make a motion to have staff do work and bring it back. So basically, I'm here if I can answer any questions about, what did the Getty bill look like at the time? What does it really do? What does it not do? And then kind of also maybe talk a little bit more about what the proposal would be for this upcoming legislative session if in fact IGR and or the full council wants to advocate for something similar. So so in starting with a little bit of background, this was in your voluntary annexation AIS, but prior to 2007, annexation in Lane County was controlled by the Lane County Local Government Boundary Commission. The cities didn't make individual annexation decisions. It went to the separate agency. And for Local Government Boundary Commission annexation applications, there was no contiguity requirement. So that you could have a piece of property that annexed into the city of Eugene that wasn't next to a city boundary. And so that is in large part why we have this patchwork area in River Road, Santa Clara, because if I had a property far out, I could still come in and ask to annex and the boundary commission could say yes. In 2007, 2008, the legislature abolished the boundary commission. And so the authority for annexations went back to the individual cities, which do have a contiguity requirement. So now in order to be able to annex, you have to be next to another city property. And so there are properties out, particularly in River Road, Santa Clara, that are not next to another city property and therefore cannot annex, even though there might be a property down the way that's in the city of Eugene. The Getty property was one of those properties where they were surrounded by non-annexed land, but they wanted to annex into the city in order to develop their property. And so the city worked with the property owners and took a bill to the legislature that allowed for a very short period of time, it was only effective for about a year, the opportunity for a non-contiguous piece of property that was, and it's very kind of tightly written as well, that they had to sign a contract to annexation. They needed to have been under the jurisdiction of a boundary commission. So it was really specific to Lane County. They had to be within 200 feet of the existing boundary of the city, and the owner of the property to be annexed had to have first acquired an interest in the property prior to 1973. So it was a bill that was developed very specifically for this piece of property. And so what that did was to allow that one non-contiguous piece of property to annex into the city. Separately, the city decided to, as part of the agreement with the property owners, allow them to, word for it, but do a tax. Sorry.
Tax abatement.
Yeah. Basically, they didn't pay the entire amount of the city property tax yet.
Used to be on the boundary commission years.
Oh, so all the backwards and forwards. So yeah, so there's a state statute that allows for a 10-year period following annexation, the city can decide to allow the property owner to pay something less than the full amount of city taxes to kind of ease that transition from usually a significantly lower tax burden in the county coming into the city. So that was also something that was provided to the Getty property, but that was separate from the legislative fix. The legislation was just to allow them to annex, and then separately the city decided also to incentivize that annexation with the tax. It's not really a deferral, but the lower tax rate for the 10 years. So that's what happened with the Getty property. If you are interested in doing something similar for a specific property, the bill could look a lot like the Getty bill. If you're thinking a larger scale, then obviously the bill would be drafted a little bit differently to allow more properties to annex in. And there are some things to think about in terms of, is it truly anyone within a particular area? Is it anyone within a certain distance from city services? Because there is a cost to extending the city service. Those are kind of issues to think about for IGR and the council.
And I just want to add on Lauren's last part there. Those are more technical issues that we'd also want consultation and input from Public Works in regards to the impacts for like instead of it being one parcel, if it was multiple parcels and there is extension of infrastructure, what would that look like and how would it impact workflow and everything else? And so that, I think that's the part that when Lauren and I were looking at this, we said, well, yeah, we can talk about the legal aspects, what a legislative process could look like, but then also we need to spend some time really getting our colleagues to be able to say, this is what it operationally and financially would look like as an impact to the city. And that seems to be a fairly robust scope. So
I don't want to speak for Councilor Clark, but I think that his intent is basically to see if we can get more revenue in the city through annexation. But, the cost of annexation is going to continue to go higher because connecting to city sewer and city services is a whole different ball of wax than being in the county. And I can tell you that from personal experience because my in-laws lived on Maxwell and they were going to say, we're coming into the city of Eugene over our dead bodies. Not going to do it. So, yes, they understood that they would get police, a better fire, service, access to library, all of the amenities that we provide, but at what cost? And they were not prepared to pay the cost. So they said, leave us an account. And the neighbors have said the same thing. So this is why we have had this stalemate unless you, in some areas of River Road, you had to come into the city. You had to annex into the city because of the makeup of the property.
Well, I think the financial question is the big one.
Yeah.
Right, and I would assume, well, I don't know, we'll get more information, but I would just assume that it's going to be more expensive for a non-contiguous property to annex in terms of extension of infrastructure than, depending than one that's contiguous. Depending on where they are, right? Depending on where they're.
And there is a difference between creating the conditions to allow annexation of non-contiguous properties and incentivizing annexation of those properties. So right now, there are folks in River Road, Santa Clara who cannot annex even if they wanted to, because they're not touching another city piece of property. But even if there was a bill that was similar to the Getty bill that would allow non-contiguous folks to annex in, it's a separate question about whether they would choose to, assuming that council continues its policy position of only considering voluntary annexation.
The other thing too, for River Road, for example, a lot of the streets are unimproved. So there's other things to consider in terms of the cost of annexation that would be contentious between the property owner and the city coming in. So it's like, who pays for what? And I can see my father-in-law right now. I'm not paying for that.
if I may, Chair, I think that what we wanted to be able to do is just to put this on the table from the standpoint of if council or IGR wanted to have greater definition from what is already on there, which is the statements related to sports voluntary annexation, and incentives for that. And you wanted to get more specific and give direction on what a bill or legislation could look like, then we can do that. It's just that we have something on the books right now that gives us some latitude. It would be a policy, it wouldn't necessarily be a priority. And if you wanted to move it into a priority position, then I think, as Lauren and I have shared, there's some work that would need to be done, conversations, engagement with the full city council to say, here's what this would look like, and also have an understanding of what the resource impact would be for the city, and also, what it would look like for properties that we want to annex on in, and the reality that's there. So I don't know if we need to do anything today, but our intention here was to keep you informed, address an emergent issue as appropriately as we can, and then allow for direction here in the next few months if necessary.
It does seem like, since we have another work session coming back to talk about this, that we have language that's there. We'll know more when we have that other work session. I don't know if that happens within the context of this legislative session. That seems like it's pushing things a little bit, so. I guess I would say you've got perfectly serviceable language there. We have more to learn. There's another legislative session the following year. If you wanted to come back with more information, you can do that, right? That's for you. That's for you all to decide, but that's my thought.
And if we have a comprehensive way forward, in terms of annexation, I would be supportive of it, but this is so convoluted, and the way that, River Road in Santa Clara has evolved over the years. I don't see a way out of this mousetrap. I just don't.
Yeah.
I mean, we could come with a heavy hand and try to force people in, but that would be a political mistake.
Yeah, I think the question really is, you have language that supports incentivization. There could be something that comes forward in the legislature that works for us, or we'll say doesn't work for us, but.
Ethan, do we have other communities that have similar challenges to what we have here?
Regarding the annexation,
across the state?
regarding the annexation question, I think the patchwork, I'm not sure. I think that would be a question for staff if we came back with a work session to say, where do we sit with other communities that would have that kind of contiguous patchwork. So. But if we're good, I think that we can move on with the agenda.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren.
Matt.
Appreciate
Thank you.
it. Okay, so I'm just gonna loop together number 3 and 4, and we'll just kind of walk us through some of these updates really quickly. So at the last IGR meeting, the committee gave direction to schedule a work session after council winter break on the position of the city to repeal House Bill 3115. That is tentatively scheduled for January 22nd, 27th, or the 27th for work session. And so we'll have better clarity on after the 12th of December. Mostly that's scheduling related to new mayor, new councilors, and the fire fee discussion, how that's all rolling on out. So that's just an update. It is on the calendar and it's being scheduled, and we're working with staff to get prepared for that. And then what I'm hearing is that we would also like to add on the renter housing application screening fee policy discussion of that. Yeah. I'll update that and work with Brooke Free, the chief of staff, to work on scheduling.
Yeah, I think it's better for us to have a broader conversation with that than just having a recommendation from a GR.
And that will, that timing will allow us
To do that.
the ability to do that during the session. Okay, just kind of moving into an update on the priorities. This is attached, and this is going back to the memo. So number one, long-term direct funding to cities for in-house shelter. Just an update is the work group's recommendation includes the creation of a new vehicular camping and basic freestanding structure category. This would allow Eugene shelter sites to access state funding. Under this new category regarding direct funding, the work group is recommending regional entities be funded. Eugene continues to advocate for language that would allow for direct pass-through funding to cities via the regional entities, somewhat like an earmark or appropriation. Mayor, do you have anything to add to that since you've been on?
I guess, sort of two things. One is that I'm hopeful about this new category, that it might be helpful to us. And I think it's a long shot that we would get direct allocations. I think they're really gonna, in our case, we go through.
Yeah, and I was on a call with OHCS staff yesterday and they clarified that they, in their agency recommended budget, they put forward, I think it's like $217 million for the biennium for shelter and just as a category. And that was for emergency shelter and outreach services. And so that within that would be a third bucket, which now creates potentially competition with attention. So we're going to just continue to navigate that, but we've worked diligently to create that eligibility, and it's part of what the work group is recommending. So yeah, it's a success. Number two, seek funding for Clear Lake Road infrastructure. So we'll be requesting $8.5 million for phase one, and I'm currently working with PDD staff to update the project request materials and submit a capital construction request sometime in December, and that'll give us plenty of time to get it into the queue for the capital construction process.
Before you move on, Ethan,
Yep.
let me ask you a quick question. I think it's important. Recently, I had a conversation with Rep. Fahey's chief of staff, and his advice to me was make sure that we're as aligned as we possibly can be with the county's list of priorities and their ask for this legislative session, because a lot of things are going to come through the counties this time as opposed to coming through the cities. So, no, I trust JJ on this, that, he said, look, this is the road that the legislature and the governor is going to go down. So, and I know that Alex is no longer with the county. He retired, didn't he?
Yes.
He retired. So who's the new person at the county that's your counterpart?
They they hired, and all of a sudden, as you asked me that, my mind drew blank of the person's name. She had been Vanessa Cornwall. She had been the working in constituent services with Congressman DeFazio, now Congressman Hoyle. So
Okay.
I think that has started at the end of last month, and so reaching on out regarding the. I would say yes to collaborating with the county, and that has been a key part of the in-house shelter works, working with the county, both in the work group and our staff, working with county staff and leadership, working with leadership. In regards to number two, the direct funding for infrastructure projects, that still come directly to cities. That is a capital construction request, and capital construction projects tend to be location specific, and so we'll continue to advocate for having that. I think the other big piece is that while the governor and the legislature is interested in more regional allocations, our position will continue to be that that having those regional allocations with as much specificity as what would be a pass through to a local government And the reason for that is that many times in provision of these services and programs, cities, we prefer not to be lumped into the same category as a nonprofit service provider. We have a much different duty. And as an example of going back to the long-term funding for unhoused shelter, the conversation was, well, there's going to be a reduction in state and federal funds for this. And so we will have to retract services. And my position for the city was that is not the position that the city is able to take, because if there's people on the streets in dire need of services, we have to show up. We show up. Our community demands that. And so there is a difference there related to a service provider not having adequate funds and saying we can't do anything, and a local government not having access to funds. We still are going to be having our EMS, our fire, our police, our emergency services out. So related, I'm just going to keep moving forward. But your point is well taken, and that's number 3 is increased support, increased state investment, behavioral health. So in addition to the 1014 and 1125 work sessions, Lane County and Peace Health announced that they're expanding the critical behavioral health services in Lane County. And so I continue to engage the Lane County Policy Director for alignment opportunities. So Steve Adams and I regular conversations, and we're continuing to say, okay, where can Eugene and Lane County land together related to behavioral health, related to shelter, so that we can be collaborative and cooperative when we go to Salem, because we both know that that is going to be more beneficial for the region and for so. Number 4, support.
One other follow-up question that.
Yep.
Between now and the end of January, should council leadership have a meeting with, county folks to talk some of this through, or is that non-productive?
Councilor Evans, I would say that a joint elected official meeting, if it's, question is, do you engage your counterparts over the county? I'm assuming that you all have the latitude to do that. If you want on a personal level, if you want to do that in an official manner in terms of a joint elected official meeting, that would be something to defer to the manager and senior staff. There is an item that get at related to our engagement with the delegation, but I'll hold that to good.
Okay, I won't interrupt you. Go for
it. No, I appreciate your interruptions. I'm just letting you know, like, those are how I respond. Support increase, number 4, in protections related to threats to public officials. So as I shared, we're utilizing Senate Bill 92, the first version from 2013 as basis for the Legislative Council's first bill draft. So that's happening. We haven't gotten a bill draft back yet, but on the 7th of October, Catherine Brotherton, Brooke Reed, and myself met with Senator Brzezinski to discuss the request. He gave his full support and committed to bring the bill forward, and the Senate Judiciary Committee is either a committee bill or a personal bill, so we're still waiting. But he's 100%. Number 5, securing authority for local governments to prohibit firearms in public buildings, and so this would be utilizing House Bill 2007 from the 2023 session as a vehicle. Again, we met during our October 7th meeting with Senator Brzezinski. He gave full support and committed to bring the bill forward in the Senate Judiciary. There is a House member who is bringing the bill forward. That House member is running for a Senate seat. I believe I haven't checked Senate Representative Reynolds, but if she moves on into a Senate seat, then Senator Brzezinski is going to work with her to bring that bill to his committee and say, this is a bill that needs to come through my committee. Number 6, improvements to the ground emergency medical transportation system. And so I spoke with ESF Deputy Chief Heppel. He's engaged in all of this, and he said, keep me informed, but he also said that currently, so Representative Graber is an actual in duty
TDF and our firefighter.
firefighter, Walden Valley. And so she's leading this in an EMS modernization 2.0 bill. I'm going to incorporate this component. So we're going to track that and be engaged. And the deputy chief is well networked within, and so he and I just work together. It keeps me informed, support where I can. Well represented. Seeking minor revision to Senate Bill 1565 to support city parking operations and efficiencies. So again, we added this to the discussion we had on the 7th with Senator Brzezinski, and he has a different perspective on our policy than where we're trying to go. And so we're continuing to work through gathering more data on options and also engaging with other cities to approach alternatives. So that one's still, we're trying to figure out how we can align with the senator's vision and operations for the bill, and also understand some of the cost and operational impacts that the current theft and vandalizing of our street meter systems is to be discovered, coming on. See what happens. Number 8, potential priorities TBD. So the revision of House Bill 3115. Again, we're going to be discussing that later. The update is that, so and I did put in here, what our update is, but also League of Oregon Cities Board of Directors approved their priorities, and it include the following. ORS 195.530 Johnson v. Grants Pass. The LLC will advocate public policy that allows cities to respond to unique needs of their communities, housed and unhoused members. This advocacy will include adjustments to ORS 195.530 to provide cities with the necessary tools to address unsafe camping conditions, safeguard public spaces, and protect the health, safety, and wellness of all community members. As you remember from the conversation with City Attorney Catherine Brotherton, her perspective was either leave it alone or give us a repeal. Trying to muddle in the middle of all of that is going to be a lot of work, both legislatively and then if it's codified, and then come back to local governments to then navigate. And so we'll see. I think this will continue to be part of the discussion with council as to how we move forward on this. But, Catherine said, the worst thing is probably just meddling with a few different things. So we'll keep watching that, and we can stay engaged. There's nothing new on the housing production side of the thing. We're just continuing to be engaged and monitor that process. We're waiting for a draft package to be available. I don't see that coming out until December when the governor gives her recommended budget. The transportation package, we're continuing to work on that. So Rob Interfeld, who is our transportation planning manager, he is on one of the LOC transportation committees. He's been a representative on one of their policy committees, and he was proposed and accepted as a city representative for the transportation committee's work groups on coming up with different program aspects. And so he's been engaged and is representing that. And as we get closer to the session or during the session, I might ask Rob to come join us to talk through some of what that's looking like.
So what is the status right now? Is ODOT still talking about, or have they decided to lay off staff? My understanding was, I read something somewhere where they were, laying off staff and reducing services statewide.
Not sure. Do you have any insight, Councilor Rhodes or Mayor Dennis, from the?
No, I mean, they have a budget shortfall, so I would
Yes.
not be surprised if they were gonna lay off staff, but we haven't heard of either at MPC
No.
or I haven't heard at Wayne Act for specific numbers, or I don't know where that is.
I don't think they know yet
Yeah.
exactly. But they did say that they talked about their budget problems, but newsflash, we're all having. But yeah, there was no specificity.
Yeah, because I believe I heard something. KLCC driving one day. It's like, oh my God. You know, we're gonna take a hit in ODOT. It's not a good thing.
And then the last item that I didn't get a chance to add on, but because it came up just earlier or at the end of last week, early this week, is that we received money for Crow Road from the 2024 session. And it was in Senate Bill 1530. The way that it was written and the contract came out of it put a deadline, and this generally happens. I talked with the counterpart at Oregon Business Oregon. And generally those funds are associated because they're general funds, that they are the deadline to expend those funds is at the end of the biennium. And so by the end of June 30th, 2025, requirement to expend those funds. There are some administrative ways to approach extending those deadlines, but the most trying to say the regular approach for conventional person for addressing these issues is that there's a carry forward process in a budget bill at the legislature that Oregon Business will advocate for, but all of the project recipients also need to advocate. So it was kind of put on my radar to say, yeah, we need to show up and we need to give testimony. We need to support getting this budget allocation from the current biennium pushed forward, carried forward into the next biennium. And so that's something that we'll be doing so that we can ensure that those funds are available for construction, because that's when we'll be moving on into construction. What it might do, because more than likely that will not be included in a separate budget bill, it'll be included in an end of session kind of omnibus budget bill. And so we probably won't see that until into June. And our construction season is May or earlier. And so I'm working with Public Works staff to figure out how do we schedule that, or do we just wait until we have actual contract surety that the state has extended those funds and we've got an updated contract, and then we let the contract and there's a delay of 3 to 6 months. And so we're figuring that on out, how we can approach that internally, and also, but we do need to have this as one of our priorities, is to carry those funds forward. Additionally, when the bill was written, the line item in it allowed for water and sewer infrastructure. In the materials that we submitted, it said transportation, water, sewer, and storm. And so because of this will need a contract, because there will need to be a statutory change to carry these funds forward, we're also going to ask for the bill to be amended to allow for transportation and stormwater infrastructure, which shouldn't be a major issue. It just allows us to use the funds for the project in complete versus having to then just use it for water.
If we're having to ask to carry this forward, is that going to hurt our chances to ask for more money for the Clear Lake Road development?
It's a good question, Councilor Groves. My sense is no. I think that that was money that was allocated. Eugene is pretty advanced in where our project readiness was compared to a bunch of the other projects that got funded under 1530. So I think there's going to be a number of cities and also other providers of services that were allocated dollars in that bill that are going to keep coming back and saying, yeah, we just need this to be allocated further on down the line, which is a conventional process.
Getting that Clear Lake Road area to be shovel ready is a critical thing we need. So.
Well, and then I had a conversation this morning with Josh Bates and our new Public Works Director about the readiness of Golden Gardens for that infrastructure. So, you start putting things together, that infrastructure is going to not only support development of medium and low density or medium and low industrial development, but also in the sports park. And I think their goal is to start with 2 fields by 2027. And
That's it for
that would
me.
also include the lights and the parking and the road improvements that need to be done on Clear Lake. You know, provide access for people to get there.
It's my draft.
All right.
Great.
There are lots of stuff taken care of before the lights go in.
Yeah.
It'll be ripe for the picking out there.
Mhm. Well, any more items for the good of the order?
Oh, there's also number 5, sorry.
Right. Oh, that's right, federal
So-
spending.
So I just wanted to let you know that we have completed, and so I put into the packet and also in the materials that were sent out online, FY 26 Eugene CES materials. And so we created a new process that is set out with a timeline for us to engage all of the departments about what are infrastructure federal projects that we would seek a appropriation, quote unquote, in there. And so all of those projects are coming back by the end of this month. We're going to go through a process. Myself and the chief of staff will go through a process to evaluate those and prioritize them. And part of that is looking at what the senators and congresswomen have identified as priorities and aligning that. Additionally, we'll also be looking at what council's strategic plan is and aligning and providing, prioritizing based upon the priorities that have been set forth in that document. And then coming back to execs with a group of, here are the 3 to 5 projects that we think we need to apply for this year and seek to get funding for, with the recognition that 1, 2, 3 might get picked, but we want to have a more robust application of different types of projects. And in that, there's also a component part of IGR engagement in terms of information sharing, saying here's where we are, here's the projects, do you have any questions, input, moving it forward based upon what the given priorities by council are in the strategic plan. Yeah. So I just wanted to let you know, like, we really tried to tighten that on up, and we'll have an engagement as the process goes. I'll be adding it to the agendas to bring that to you.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
And given,
Yeah.
and given the outcome of the election last night, no, I won't ask that question. I'll keep that one myself.
How much money will there be?
Or where this money is going to be spent and how
Go
it's
to the
going
West
to be
Coast.
spent.
Well, it's congressionally directed spending, so they get to make their submissions. So,
See how that turns out.
I mean, they have a certain amount of money to work with, and they get to work with it. I'm assuming that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the larger question is just that will the congressionally directed spending appropriation process continue to be supported?
Yeah.
It just depends on if it's something that Congress wants to continue to do, or they say, no, we did that for a couple of years, we're not going to do it.
Mhm.
So. That's for the good of the order.
Anything else?
Yeah.
I think
One more item.
go for it.
So every year we always try to get an engagement with our delegation prior to the start of the delegation. And in the past, we've done a breakfast with delegation, and we're going to do that again. And this year, I also think that we'd like to be able, we will invite IGR. And so I'm working with our staff to schedule, and also the speaker's office, and then we'll engage the full delegation. But her schedule is generally the really tight one, and it's also we want to recognize that she's the leader of the house. house that, and her district is a big part of our community. So having her in attendance is very important for us. So we will be putting together probably a 2-hour breakfast meeting in this room. It'll be in December, and we'll have it, catered, and it'll be a policy discussion. Ideally, we'll have our priorities, and so likely in the early December meeting, I will be seeking support to say, IGR, we need to at least adopt this set of priorities, which we think are aligned with council priorities and that are not going to be ones that would get countermanded at council discussion, with the recognition that there's going to be the formal process in January, and there's going to be some straggler policy things that we're going to be needing to address. But at least we can have the discussion about some of the key priorities related to shelter, economic development, housing infrastructure, and then if Senator Brzezinski is going to be able to attend and talk about some of the ones that will be in the judiciary. That's also just a good opportunity. There will be 2 new members, and if they potentially a third, I don't know who the Senate. So I will be updating the outcomes of the election related to the representative delegation from Eugene. So we'll have new members that we'd like to be able to engage with. So.
Great, glad that's happening. Thank you.
All right, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, I'll call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Yeah.